We'll have to have the colonel back sometime in the next couple of weeks to talk about that flag amendment. I will. I'll add to that my own experience about flag desecration. I come from a lot of strong libertarian strand in my family and in my upbringing. And in the late 1980s, I worked with a friend who was heavily involved and he worked in concert with a local congressman on the radio to try and strengthen, the laws about desecration of the flag. And then in the late 80s, the courts came along and said, no, it's obviously a form of expression protected under the First Amendment, free speech. And I may have walked around the rest of my life with that sort of notion. And then a few years after that, I got sent to do an interview with a group of survivors from Iwo Jima. So I went to this convention they were having, and I got to talk to these men, and then they started telling me what it meant to them when they were hunkered down in volcanic ash, just trying to get off that island alive. And what they did is they started hearing the horns from ships offshore honking, and what the ships were doing, they were celebrating the fact that the flag was going up on Mount Suribachi. And when they looked up, the inspiration it gave them, the battle lasted for another 3.5 weeks, but the inspiration it gave them to get up and move forward, that's that strength of what they were telling me made me realize that it is the most potent symbol we have. And I realize the people out there who desecrate it, and we'll see more of that because of call it the liberal angst with Donald Trump, but it really drives home the meaning of it. And for those people who give up their lives or risk their lives or give up body parts, to me, that says we need to defer to them in this argument. 925, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 25, and I want to thank you for joining us. I have been telling you over the last several months about the total body transformation system, which not only I've lost weight on this, folks. I lost 60 pounds in 4 months, and an incredible 18 pounds in the first couple of weeks I was on it. And I have friends who've had same incredible success who've now started. They joined me on the diet, and I've been telling you about it for the last several months because obviously, for those of us out there who've struggled with a lot of diets, this one works, and it works, and you're not. I'll put it this way: you can be disciplined enough to stay with it. I've had friends who've gone on these concentration camp diets, for crying out loud, and when they come off of them, they eat everything in sight. That's not good. But this is a manageable diet that people can engage in, and they can stay healthy while they're doing it, and they're not going to be dealing with a lot of hunger pangs and cravings. It was developed by a company that's been in business over 20 years with an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau, backed by a scientific team that includes researchers at prestigious universities such as Cornell, Tufts, and Columbia. And it has been awarded the Total Body Transformation System, awarded patents for reducing waist circumference and the other for increasing metabolic rate and weight control. You'll burn 6 times more fat and lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. The meal replacement is healthier than most of the meals you would be eating. You can still have a healthy amount of calories. And again, I bring this up. People ask me about cost all the time. The cost is affordable. In fact, if you look at the meal replacement plan versus what you'd be spending on groceries, it's the same. You'll lose 22 pounds if the average patient will, that is. Well, don't call them patient. Let's say the average individual who likes to look good will lose 22 pounds and lose 4 inches off their waist in just 60 days. I wanted to mention as well, there's an unconditional full money back guarantee. And if you'd like to know more, you can contact Don Chandler. He's right here in Twin Falls, and he is a diet success as well, having lost over 50 pounds. Don is at 208-731-3560. He's at 208-731-3560. Coming up on 928 on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Got to share a couple of things with you in the end of this segment and going into the next segment. We are hearing that the president may be coming up with an alternative to his executive order on the refugee pause from 7 dangerous countries. Meanwhile, the liberal left continues its pushback. This is the former Star Trek actor, George Takei. I believe that's how he pronounces the last name. I think Takai or Takei. I'll go with Takei. He played Mr. Sulu on that program. And when he was young, because of his Japanese ancestry, his family had been locked away in one of the camps that had been set up by President Franklin Roosevelt because they worried about the fact that these folks might actually side with the Japanese Empire. He was speaking at a rally in Los Angeles last night, and Takei said he's on the side of the Islamic refugees.
We will not let this outrage happen again. We are standing together to uphold the American values embodied in the Constitution of the United States.
Have you ever wondered, when it comes to these liberals, just how off the rails they are? If you didn't know it, Mr. Sulu, as his television character, Mr. Sulu is married. He is married to a man. That means that George Takei is a homosexual. And therefore, if he were to encounter a gaggle of these Islamists, they would likely have an interest in throwing him off the top of a building. His lifespan, if he happened to actually live in one of their countries where they are dominated by Sharia law, his lifespan would be probably down to seconds. And yet, they'd like to welcome these people here with open arms. This is the part of it that I'm sorry, I can't square it in my head. How would you lead to your own demise? Why would you actually be looking for your own demise by throwing open your arms to these people? More on this subject on the way. Some of you may know this, that before Donald Trump actually was inaugurated, after he'd won the election last November, one of his advisors when it came to constitutional and legal issues was Judge Andrew Napolitano, who he had his own show on the Fox Business Channel for a long time and still a regular commentator, I guess is the best word for that, commentator on Fox News. And he's a syndicated newspaper columnist as well. He was joining Martha McCallum last night on the Fox News Channel on the first 100 days. And the question came up, what does the president do? What is his next step? Since the Communist Court of Appeals in San Francisco rejected his travel pause from the 7 countries that Mr. Obama, we should point out, had listed as being dangerous and the hotbeds of terrorism. Judge Napolitano says there's a very simple way to get around this.
All right, so the White House doesn't want that process to go through the Ninth Circuit, right? But they also have the option, as you had pointed out, to rewrite the executive order.
I have been arguing all day that the president, for legal, constitutional, and political reasons, should tear up the executive order of the 29th of January and write a new one. If he does that, this case goes away. So do the 48 other cases that have been filed against him, and he knows what the deficiencies are in that order, so he knows how to correct them.
Wonderful. So that's all we have to do, apparently, in order to get around the effort by these folks trying to make national policy and usurp that role that the president has in dealing with foreign relations, is to have the president write a new order and then go from there. So hopefully that's done soon, right? We're looking forward to that if you're one of these Americans who is concerned about the integrity of our borders and also our security and safety. I've got this today from the National Catholic Reporter. Some of you know that Governor Butch Otter is also a Roman Catholic and at one time had considered going into seminary when he was a young man. The writer says, an interfaith alliance based in Boise, Idaho. As soon as you hear interfaith, your first thought is, I'm sure, liberal. So the Liberal Interfaith Alliance based in Boise plans to deliver a letter to Governor Otter tomorrow asking him to retract a recent statement that he would prefer Christian refugees be given priority by his state. Otter said on February 3rd on a PBS interview he agrees with President Donald Trump that persecuted Christians should be treated as priority in the U.S. refugee program. Then speaking at the Idaho Press Club, I didn't realize there was such a thing, the governor defended his earlier statement but qualified it, saying, I think it's not discriminatory, I think it's preference. While no Catholic congregations nor the Boise Diocese are affiliated with the Interfaith Conference, at least 2 Catholics did sign the letter. Both liberals, obviously. 936. I sent out a tweet this morning of my own. I picked this up. If the president can do it, I can do it. And it said, don't go wobbly, Butch. Hold your ground. Well, he doesn't have to run for re-election. I guess that should be a simple thought. 27 right now. We have a caller with us, and you're up next. You're on KLIX.
Quickly, a couple points. There's the reason why we don't get any Christian refugees is because they can't go to the camps with all of the Muslim refugees because they are literally beat, in some cases killed. We never hear about these things. So if you were a Christian, would you go to a refugee camp with a majority of Muslims?
Well, and of course, if we brought them here, obviously, the homosexuals would demand they bake cakes and the like. So Christians are persecuted here and they're persecuted there. It's open season on them, and I think that's why we're seeing all of this wailing about what Governor Otter said.
Well, exactly. And so then when we talk about immigrants, refugees from Islamic countries, or illegals from the southern border, the crime across this nation is so numerous that nobody even tries to start to cover it. One example, a Muslim man raped a 13 or 14-year-old girl or whatever it was. He prayed before he raped her, and he said that Allah gave him the right to rape her because she was an infidel. He raped her, and then he prayed afterward. These are some of the things that are going on in this country that we hear nothing about. I'll hang up. Thanks, Bill.
And that's where you get out the shotgun and you just blow that guy's brains out in the prison yard, and you let everybody know who comes here. And there will be some people who come here. You let them know it doesn't work that way in the good old USA. That's all. There's simply ways to get around this. But you've got to respond because they've come from harsh cultures. You've got to respond in a way that they understand. And if you set that example early on, then you won't have these issues. I told you yesterday, there's a professor at Georgetown University. He's a convert to Islam. He gave a speech the other day. Now, he's teaching young, impressionable minds at a Catholic university in the nation's capital. He gave a speech the other day where he defended slavery, saying, well, if the Prophet Muhammad had slaves, he's the prophet of God, then you can't criticize slavery. And number two, he then defended forcing women to have sex with him or any other Muslim man, because apparently the Prophet did that too. Do we want more of that here? That's my question. Now, do they all come here and say, aha, we're going to live that way? Of course not. But Europe has already seen it, and this idea that we're immune from what's happened in Europe in very similar cultures, they've reached a tipping point now where that group that believes in rape and slavery has gotten very vocal and is looking to exert power. Why wouldn't you, if you're taking refugees at all, why wouldn't you take the Christians then first? More on this topic and some others coming up in a few minutes on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com with Bill Colley. It's 26 at 9:40. The liberal reporter Jorge Ramos last night appeared on Sean Hannity's program on Fox and said that illegal immigrants, of course we could probably throw in refugees into his comments as well, actually make America safer. Again, I don't know how that works. If they weren't here at all, even the good people wouldn't be here, but the bad people wouldn't be here, which would mean America would probably be safer than what he believes. 9:43, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. We're at 28. I have this today. This comes from the Washington Examiner. Bilal Ahmed Askariar was the man charged with assault, according to Politico, in the effort to block Betsy DeVos from entering a public school. If you don't know, she's the new federal education secretary. This is confusing, the writer says, because I thought they wanted an education secretary who had, quote, firsthand knowledge of public schools, unquote. It's not clear yet exactly whom Askariar is charged with assaulting, and he has pleaded not guilty. He is a longtime human rights activist. He wrote a piece last month for NPR in which he tells the gripping story of fleeing Afghanistan with his family. Eventually, they were granted asylum in the U.S. He writes that he became a citizen in 2000. He told the story as well in the Washington Blade. the gay DC publication. In these stories, Asghariar recounts his family's opposition to Soviet imperialism and to the Taliban. In other words, he is an Islamic refugee, but he's also a gay Muslim, which means that after he would throw George Takei off the top of the building, he'd have to throw himself off just to satisfy his Islamic law. So this is the fellow who was berating the education secretary while she tried. First of all, when I saw the video of that, where is the security? If somebody is doing that to your Secretary of Education, somebody should walk over and just pull out the billy club and floor that individual. Blocking access and then, trying to spit on the woman and screaming at her, and apparently he must have physically touched someone as well. There's a notion among the American left that there's not going to be any retribution for what they're doing when they're smashing windows and setting fires and assaulting people. And media allows it to go on. If these types of activities had happened at Tea Party rallies, media's reaction would have been, it would certainly not have been the same. Media has a lot of splaining to do in this country, and I'm telling you, if they don't get around to doing it soon, I have no sympathy for these folks at newspapers and mainstream media networks when they're circling the drain. None. Because if they would do their jobs journalistically and treat one side, oh, well, the two sides aren't alike. No, what you mean is that you're a liberal, and therefore your own bias is getting in the way of doing your job. I mentioned earlier in the program, the Wall Street Journal's editor had to pull his staff together and tell them, hey, you got to cool it. You're going to cover Donald Trump like you covered Barack Obama, because that's what we do. You're not here to, what's the word I'm looking for? Proselytize for your fellow travelers and your liberal causes. And his reporting staff didn't like it. And he told them, he said, if you don't like it, there's the door. I'm glad someone in media in a powerful position is starting to realize they've got to do this. Speaking of media, came across a story this morning that I thought was worth sharing because Helena, Montana is about a 6-hour drive from where we currently sit, and in the terms of Western states, that's practically next door. A writer at Slate, which is a liberal publication, we should point out, has a story that is based in Helena, Montana, and it appeared in that publication apparently during the overnight. I found the link at Real Clear Politics today. Headline, we use terrible science to justify smoking bans. Way back 14 years ago in Helena, there was an attempt to ban smoking in public restaurants, and I guess that would be, as opposed to a private restaurant. There are some. In restaurants and in taverns and in workplaces and the like. And within a few months, there was a huge drop in the number of heart attacks that took place in Helena. So 3 local doctors immediately decided to publish a paper saying that it was secondhand smoke that was responsible for all of these heart attacks, and that by eliminating the secondhand smoke, they had saved 60% of this large number of people from having heart attacks. The writer of the story, Jacob Greer, says for 3 anti-smoking advocates, they were named Richard Sargent, Robert Shepard, and a researcher named Stanton Glantz. They all said that now if we would just do this nationwide, we would protect people from the scourge of secondhand smoke. Newspapers then ran with the story, amplifying it, assuming that the correlation had been truly caused by the smoking ban. That is, the number of heart attacks dropped because of the ban on smoking. Now, while no one is advocating smoking, it's not good for you. We all know that. We have enough evidence piled up to say so. While no one is actually bringing that up, the writer says a decade later, comprehensive smoking bans have proliferated globally, and now that the evidence has had time to accumulate, it's also become clear that the extravagant promises made by anti-smoking groups that implementing bans would bring about extraordinary improvements in cardiac health never materialized. Now, why again did this happen? Because of media amplification. Media playing the role of Henny Penny, just as media has played the role of Henny Penny in the global warming argument over the past couple of decades. The writer says the updated science debunks the alarmist fantasies that were used to sell smoking bans to the public. Helena has a population of 68,000, roughly. give or take a few people dying and being born here and there. 68,000 people over the span of a few months is not enough time to come to a scientific conclusion. Critics noted that the rate of heart attacks in England had also been falling in the years prior to the ban there, and that the reason for the decline was still not clear. So, in other words, there was a decline in heart attacks in England, but it happened before a ban. Now, the writer, this is several pages long, the writer goes into some depth about how people kept trying to peer review the results and kept finding they couldn't replicate it. Small sample sizes allowed random variances in data to be mistaken for real effects. The second is that most previous studies failed to account for existing downward trends in the rate of heart attacks. And the third is publication bias. Smoking's bad for you. We don't like smoking, therefore it must be true, even though it wasn't. And again, we get back to global warming as being a comparison here. If you're looking for an analogy, they tell you global warming is happening because, well, those evil capitalists out there with their smokestacks, they're hurting all of us as they always have, being that they go home at night. If you're a corporate executive, they go home at night, and even after work, they go home and they, how am I going to get the working people tomorrow? There's a bit of a Dr. Evil laugh that goes in there somewhere. And they go home and they do that. So media knows, academia knows, and liberals know that they're all out to get you, just like the people out there who are smoking. No clear link between passive smoking and lung cancer, finally read a 2013 headline in the Journal of National Cancer Institute. That is not a pro-tobacco publication, as you can tell by the particular name. But the writer goes on to say, we've gone beyond just these bans, and nobody is recommending that we have smoking in restaurants or in schools or in workplaces. The workplace is pretty much, I agree with it, it should be smoke-free. Unless, of course, you're working at a tobacco plant, and then I guess it becomes irrelevant. But now you have governments that are banning vaping. Well, vapor coming out of somebody's pipe is harmless. It hurts no one. It doesn't cause cancer in the lungs. It doesn't do any of those things. Number two, they're trying to ban tobacco that you chew out of these little containers in some cities. While tobacco may not be good for you, at the moment it remains a legal product in this country. The thing is, the liberals are trying to outlaw chewing tobacco, vaping, and just smoking in general, and yet at the same time telling you smoke dope, smoke dope, smoke dope. At least be consistent for a change. I heard from our county coroner at a meeting the other night that yes, indeed, there is evidence we are having marijuana overdoses resulting in deaths in some of our neighboring states that have approved marijuana, legalized it, and now condone it. And yet they'll go after people for chewing a little skull because it might someday lead to cancer. And yeah, we've got people overdosing, but you see, pot is a liberal sacrament, so that's okay. I'm telling you, the fact that the media is in league with these people, well, a caller brought up the LR scare the other day. Back in the 1990s, 60 Minutes did a piece on LR and said that this was going to kill all of your children who are eating apples in their schools. The apple industry was devastated. The following day, there were men in Congress, probably some women too, who stood up and saw an opportunity. Which way's the political wind blowing? They got up and denounced LR. They called to make changes in the way we use the pesticide, and it destroyed that industry. It destroyed the apple industry, and it turned out to be a hoax. This is the danger of this collusion between academics and media and liberals in this country. 9:54, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 26. Unfortunately, when media makes a big mistake, they'll put the mistake on the front page. The correction is always a tiny little paragraph on page B17. The other day, we said the world was coming to an end. We acknowledge that perhaps it may not be coming to an end this week. 736-0300, 736-0300, the telephone number to reach our program today. Got a couple of minutes before we wrap up the show. Let's go back to the phones, and you're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Well, good morning, Bill. It's just beyond comprehension that people think here in the state of Idaho and throughout the nation that by having a constitutional convention, it's going to force our politicians. They're not abiding by the Constitution that we have now. So having an amendment for balanced budget or whatever is going to be abided by our Congress any more than they do now. They've thrown the Constitution in the corner. Liberals and Democrats and Republicans and they just ignore it because their political expediency. So here in Idaho, Speaker Scott Bedke and local people are now introducing a bill to involve Idaho in a constitutional convention, and it would be a total runaway disaster. We would basically throw the Constitution we have now, the Bill of Rights, in the garbage can and probably start over.
Well, this morning I read we could be seeing this introduced today, right?
Yeah, I think that bill's being introduced today, and I think locally right there, one of your people is, from what I understand, Senator Lee Hyder is
my district, yeah,
is involved in that. So people get hold of Senator Hyder and say, "Stop this nonsense." I mean, do you think that we have more wisdom out there today than these founding fathers that sacrificed their lives to put together this thing? And our Constitution is to be upheld, and changing it won't make a balanced budget. They can balance the budget all right, just raise taxes, and that's probably what they would do. And there's so many exclusions if you're during war, which we basically are in a state of war almost perpetually most of my life, and it's not going to make any difference other than it puts us into a runaway convention deal, and the liberals, George Soros's and the Rockefellers, would love to get their hands on the Constitution. It's a ruse and needs to be stopped. Get hold of all of your representatives and senators and say, vote no on any of these bills. Bedke should be taken to the woodshed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the call. If it is, it looks as if the leadership is behind it. That means Idaho will be on board with this CONCON, the Constitutional Convention. There are two ways to amend our Constitution in the United States. One is by states having these conventions. The other is coming from Capitol Hill in Washington. The traditional method is Capitol Hill proposes it, and then the states can ratify or choose not to. And that's how everything has been done in the past with amendments. The problem is these states, and the caller is very correct on this, they can claim they're only going to talk one issue, and that's balanced budget. And we all say, well, gosh, balanced budget would be a good thing. We as conservatives or libertarians, we're on board with that, and it'll be healthy and help us reduce our spending in this country and maybe save us from spending ourselves into oblivion. But all of the legal people I've spoken with tell me, yeah, they could start rewriting the entire Constitution, and this thing could spread like a wildfire. It's not a good idea to chance that. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 27. Rush Limbaugh is coming up next following the news from Fox right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. God willing, the creek don't rise. They'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning, Wednesday, between 8 and 10 o'clock.